Marketers put a lot of effort into creating content. Yet, a key factor that limits content usage and impact is that content is hard to find. That means a lot of content goes unused. I'm Lisa Gately, Principal Analyst at Forrester. During our time together today, we're going to talk about 3 practical areas to help you improve how your content gets found. I want to get super practical with tips so that you can take them back to your team and take action. I mentioned a moment ago the observation about how many organizations find their content isn't found. This is backed up by Forrester's research. In our most recent State of B2B Content study, we learned that most organizations have content waste. And in fact, there's a compounding effect at work. When you consider how few organizations, if you're taking marketing as an example, the marketing organization isn't using modular content. They are maintaining more repositories than ever, and they don't have a universal taxonomy. That's just across marketing systems. It's no wonder that organizations are experiencing a lot of content waste. Now, we know whether you care about content measurement, content management, customer service, e-commerce, digital marketing, or personalization, metadata and taxonomy are super important for your business. But again, there are alarming facts. From our research, we recognize that only 24% of marketing organizations have a universal taxonomy. That's a system that touches content and customer lifecycle. Even across marketing, from this example, people are using multiple taxonomies, and they can't classify things the same way across their systems. It limits the ability to find and measure content. Another interesting stat is that only 10% of marketers say they rate themselves as advanced in content operations. You have to wonder, how do we do this with such a turn toward digital interactions? It's an incredible stat. When we look at the flip of this, how many marketers consider themselves beginners? Maybe a few are intermediate. It reveals a huge opportunity for us. And that is content across the business, whether you're a marketer or any other role. Content is serious, and being able to find it and classify it. So anybody who is working on content operations is setting themselves up for a lot of success today and into tomorrow. I'm going to go through 3 areas that will help you with this so that we collectively and individually improve our skills and make sure that we improve how our content is found. Now, 3 factors affect how your content gets found, starting with taxonomy. This is how your organization is classifying content in its systems. It really signals your readiness, things like standardization, governance, and measurement. With your taxonomy, that's how you're ready to take on that activity. Now, when it comes to metadata or tagging, this is signaling the aboutness of the content. And you do that through various lenses, whether you're thinking about content type, audience, topics, geography. This is a signal for how you can execute, particularly if you want to take different components and combine them dynamically. You are signaling the readiness to execute so that you could get greater content reuse, atomization, and activation. And finally, there's curation. That's a set of skills and activities that you're really taking on the day-to-day. You're able to improve accuracy, consistency, and findability. This is all about the signal that you can sustain all of these efforts. Everything you're seeing on the screen, your curation skills and activities bring it to life. So let's talk about these one by one, starting with taxonomy. Many marketers step into a role and they inherit a taxonomy. What that means is you and your team will need to look at the taxonomy and how you are using it across multiple systems possibly and make some updates. What you can do is look at where could you design things for the future if you were to start to make some changes and really work cross-functionally, maybe start working more broadly across the organization. Other marketers, maybe you'll have a hand in setting a taxonomy from the very start with an organization. But in any case, whenever you have that opportunity to plan for taxonomy, you want to do so with the results in mind. Here are 3 ways to think about this. Taxonomy starts with access. That is really helping the audience find content. That's about filters, navigation, and keywords. How is the audience thinking about this when they search for information? You want to set up your taxonomy with that in mind. The second area is automation. This is how can you make use of the systems and technologies that help you combine elements, be a lot more dynamic about that, and do that with very little human intervention. So there's signaling in these tags to help your systems use the content through integrations. The third area is analytics. This is where you want to look at, ideally, you are able to manage and then measure how your content's performing. Through all of the things that we've talked about, you're able to start looking at linking content impact to business performance. That's things like campaign performance, pipeline opportunities, customer growth, productivity. Think about these 3 things whenever you have a chance to plan your taxonomy. Another thought is, as you get in there, you'll be able to define the taxonomy categories. What you see on screen is an example. It's not an exhaustive list. We know that most organizations have some of the categories listed on the left-hand column. What you can take away from this is this. You will need to make updates over time as your company makes changes. Let's say you add new products to the portfolio, you extend your offerings. That means you're going to extend the taxonomy. So you'll go through and update the metadata for some of those categories. It could be you and your team are looking at how can you use new functionality of systems, or how could you develop different dashboards? Again, you would want to talk between teams about how you do that in a way that's specific enough to accomplish what you've set out to do. The other thing is, eventually, you move toward a universal taxonomy. You'll start to see there are some categories that are suitable for both internal and external audiences. That's right here in this example where you see the line item for knowledge requirement or the example for approved use. Those are 2 areas in this chart where maybe you would see that in use for content for sales teams or internal audiences. You'd also see that knowledge requirement being applicable externally, the content you expose for buyers and customers. All right, so let's say you've got some ideas. You really want to make some changes to your organization's taxonomy. A best practice here is that you adopt a defined, repeatable approach. What I mean is, these efforts need to stand up over time. You want to reach out and work with cross-functional teams so that you're gathering a lot of feedback and before you move forward. So start out by defining the scope. What is the change that you have in mind? And get some buy-in. You could build a pilot and start getting input and requirements from other people across the organization. And that way you could validate how would the taxonomy and the tagging structure change. Then you deploy it and you're able to see how that works out. You could start training users and training everybody who's in the systems and continue with refinements over time. But it gives you something that you could go back to as you make changes over time. The other best practice is to think about how can you build cross-functional alignment. You could call it a council or any name that suits your team, your organization. The example I'm showing here is for marketing. Let's say you get together marketing team members and you're talking about some of the changes that you need to bring forward, particularly with changes to the topics and the content that you're doing into the future, or maybe it's how it shows up in different systems. Again, the taxonomy and tagging. What you do is get a group together for some discussion. Generally, you're going to find some people have better insights about the audience and how they search for things. They know your offerings. They know the range of content that you have and what would be suitable for some taxonomy and tagging changes. All right, let's talk about metadata. This is again where you have the execution and the day-to-day progress being made. We know that you want to avoid the most common tagging pitfalls, and I'm showing an example here. Let's first talk about why is tagging so important. It really can create significant problems downstream. We see it a lot in organizations where tagging is left to everybody. It's a little bit of everybody's job, so it becomes nobody's job. And what happens when you over-tag, it means that you could produce irrelevant results. Your audience can be overwhelmed with things, or they find stuff that they think has nothing to do with their search and get frustrated. The other side of this is maybe you're missing assets entirely. They're never surfaced. And in both, you're really not getting any meaningful insight. So, over-tagging happens, again, when everybody is left to tag their own content. You find team members who are enthusiastic and they want their content to be found, but they use every tag imaginable, all in the effort because they think it's going to help. But what happens, like the example here, is they've tagged things to the point that it's useless. They've got every journey phase, they've got every audience, every offering, every vertical, every keyword or topic possible in trying to get this to be found. The opposite of this, when we talk about under-tagging, is usually you've got team members who want to just get their stuff published. They will do the minimum. So maybe they're using 1 or 2 required tags, and that's all. And there's not enough to surface the content. So here is the ultra practical advice. People ask, how can we get better at tagging? How do we set our team up for success? I look at it in these 4 ways. This is something that will help you with day-to-day decision-making if you're explaining this across a team. First, when it comes to buyer's journey stage, don't tag for every stage. Only tag for the stage where that content is most relevant. It's very rare that content is used in absolutely every stage. Now, this introduces a question that marketing may have an idea for when this content gets used, but the audience has a different idea or experience. So you'll want to go back over time. You need to revisit your data and find out when is the content really used. You then could adjust your assumptions for when you tag different items by stage. The second area is the content or asset format type. In general, tag for this every time. Use an asset type tag on all your content. What this will do, though, is create questions. People want to know if there are different kinds of a particular asset, what tag should I use? Let's say, for example, you've got different kinds of videos, different kinds of ebooks. It will beg the question of whether you have standardized asset templates or definitions. How do people know what to call that asset type? You want to make it easy for teams to recognize this. And over time, you could start to recognize if you're not producing some asset types anymore, clean up the tags. The third area is tagging by persona. If you're looking at all of the potential personas, again, don't tag for all of them. Go through and prioritize the personas. Who is this content really for? And in today's buying environment, if you are looking across the buying group, which we know is most common in B2B world as an example, look at the buyer role. We know that content can be shared across groups, but prioritize. Here's an example. If I had a piece of content, let's say I'm going to tag for the decision maker. That's the persona I will focus on for tagging. I figure that someone who's a champion in the buying process, they are very broad interests. If I'm tagging for the user or let's say a ratifier, they may have really specific interests. They may find information in other ways altogether, but I want to make sure the most powerful content is surfaced for the decision maker. That's one example. But over time, again, what you want to do is use your data and go back. Different customer-facing employees or different people in your team will give you some feedback about personas' preferences and when do they see different members of the audience in the buying group? What is their involvement? who is the content for, you can start to make better judgments about that and how you tag for personas. Finally, this last area is offerings and topics. That's an interesting intersection, and I'll give two different examples. One, some companies, it may be that you have a flagship product that's inherently involved in everything you do. So if you are always tagging for that product, it becomes meaningless. And that's where be very judicious about if you tag for a product in that case, make sure it's for content that's really about that topic. Another scenario would be, let's say you're developing content, it doesn't mention offerings. It's not about a product. This is a great case to use topic or theme tags. The thing about this, of course, is again, look at what marketing's idea or internally the idea is for that theme or topic. It may be that your audience talks about or thinks about that topic or theme differently. It also might mean some teams develop a sprawl of topic and theme tags that really don't get used. So over time, review this and revisit your topic tags to see what you really need and whether that seems to reflect the way that your audience is searching for things. But there's more. It's not just tagging. If you were looking in this category, there's another area. Tagging is super important, but you've got another tool. That is file names. In improving findability, file names provide some rich information. That is because a file name, when it is information rich and contains keywords, there's inherent clues to the aboutness of the asset. It helps your audience confirm at times, this is for me. This is what I was looking for. It really gives you some better identifiers. And further, as you go forward with this, it helps you distinguish beyond your use of asset type tags. For example, asset types may be a container or a template, but you could have different substance in that. This could help you distinguish in a way that makes it easier for people to find things. So there's a lot of information here in this table. I will just say very succinctly, make every word in your file name carry weight. Don't use filler, and don't use things that are really esoteric or meaningless to your audience. Make sure the file name is doing some work because it can help you with results. Many times, content curators, content management systems are going to look at things like expiration, promotion, and auto tagging, and your file name provides a really good clue beyond the tagging. So let's talk about curation. This is the long-term area where you really can signal how you're going to sustain efforts over time. The biggest thing I see in organizations is establishing some responsibilities for this. As I said earlier, so many teams rely on everybody to do this as a tiny percentage of their job, and that means there's no oversight. So my best advice is, if you want to make some improvements, designate some leads in your team. If it's at all possible, dedicate resources. It's that valuable. Your lead curator will help you with many things, whether it is doing checking on the tagging, check-ins on file names, correcting things as necessary. It's also helpful to do the training and the communication, particularly when you're onboarding new team members. It happens quite a lot that organizations will improve their practices, but you can tell when organizations change, when there's turnover, some of this is like taking a step backward. When you have this expertise and you have some designated roles to help you, this is what will make your leaps forward. It will be able to recognize where could your team work together, where can you make some improvements. Another curation step is going to help you with findability, and that's in embracing the content audit. A lot of us shudder when you think about a content audit, and we shouldn't, because this is where you clean out the clutter. When you think about how much content organizations have, it's really important to do this periodically. Now, I'll say a few things here. People ask about what is a signal that shows I should be doing a content audit? Is there anything that signals this? And I would say, yeah, sure. if you are seeing your organization go through major changes in your go-to-market strategy, in your portfolio, if you have new messaging and positioning, you're entering new markets, that might mean that some of the content you have is going to change, or you're going to need to update the tagging and taxonomy across the whole body of content. I also look at this if you're migrating systems. It's a good time to look at the content you have. You don't automatically carry everything over. So the other questions I get, a lot of times people ask, where do I even begin? This can feel like it's overwhelming, but I would say, beyond looking at your goals, define some clear scope. You really can't take on everything at once. So look at the areas that are most important for your organization. Maybe you're going to look at certain types of content, whether that's by asset type, by audience, by industry vertical, or even in certain repositories as you're starting to consolidate. Make it manageable. You could do this on a periodic and rolling basis. That's very common, especially with any organization with large website presence. You do this on a rolling basis. So what do you take away from today? If you take some of these practical tips back to your team, first, I would say identify team members to help you look at your current content operations practices. They're going to give you an insight into what's working and where do you think, from all of these topics we covered, where could we make immediate improvements? And then designate some resources for this. Dedicate them if you can. And at very least, have someone become your lead curator who's going to guide your efforts. This will lead you into, over time, using some kind of repeatable approach. You want to be repeatable for taxonomy and content audit. Those are things that are with you for the long haul or that have long-term effects. You're also going to prioritize the training and communication for tagging. That's where you see that day-to-day progress. Finally, you want to perform some ongoing checks. This is where you get an idea about how are we driving quality in terms of our tagging? Have we shown people what good looks like in file naming? That way you know, have we moved forward with a lot of improvements? Where can we give people more tips? All of this is well worth taking on. You'll learn from your early efforts and you'll be able to evolve your taxonomy, your metadata, and your curation so that you can improve findability. Now, as much as marketers, we want to appeal to buyers and customers and fuel our digital efforts, think about content findability as a key ingredient. Your content operations skills and your ongoing practices are what's going to help you improve the findability and increase impact. Thanks for joining.